You think you know your own face, don't you? I mean, it's the one thing you see every single day in the bathroom mirror, in your phone's camera, in every reflective surface you pass. But here's the uncomfortable truth that psychology won't advertise on a billboard. Your sense of self-recognition is so fragile that it can shatter in under 60 seconds. That's not a metaphor. That's not some mystical guru talk. That's documented, replicable science that reveals just how thin the line is between I know who I am and what the hell is staring back at me. In human behavior research, there's an experiment so simple and so disturbing that most people who try it once refuse to do it again. All you need is a mirror, dim lighting, and the guts to hold eye contact with yourself without looking away. What happens next isn't supernatural. It's your own brain turning against you, distorting your features, making you look monstrous, alien, or like someone you've never met. And the worst part? Once you see it, you can't unsee the fact that the you in the mirror was never as solid as you believed. Welcome to one of the darkest corners of weird psychology, where the familiar becomes hostile, and your reflection stops playing by the rules. Now, if you're like most people, you've probably stood in front of a mirror 1,000 times and never had anything weird happen. That's because you're always doing something. Brushing your teeth, fixing your hair, checking your outfit, scrolling on your phone. Your brain is distracted, moving, processing other inputs. But the moment you stop, truly stop, and just stare, that's when the system glitches. In strange, yet unusual psychological phenomena, this is called the strange face in the mirror illusion, and it happens to about 2/3 of people who attempt it. Your face starts to shift. Your eyes look empty or predatory. Your skin tone changes. Features melt or sharpen. Some people report seeing their face age rapidly. Others see it morph into someone else entirely. Sometimes a loved one, sometimes a stranger, sometimes something that doesn't feel human at all. This isn't your imagination running wild. This is your visual cortex, fatigued from staring at the same static image, scrambling to make sense of incomplete data. And when your brain scrambles, it doesn't default to everything's fine. It defaults to threat detection. Suddenly, the most familiar face in the world becomes the most unsettling. And here's the kicker. This happens because the foundation of your self-image, the thing you rely on to say I am me, is way more fragile than anyone wants to admit. So why does this matter? Why should you care that your reflection can betray you in 60 seconds? Because this isn't just about mirrors, it's about identity. In psychology, self-recognition is the bedrock of consciousness. It's what allows you to navigate the world with a stable sense of, I exist as a continuous being. But what if that stability is an illusion? What if the you think you are is just a story your brain keeps telling, and all it takes is one tiny disruption, a long stare, a moment of stress, a shift in perception, for that story to crumble? In human behavior, people who experience depersonalization, ego dissolution, or identity crises describe it exactly like this: looking at themselves and feeling nothing, or, worse, feeling like they're staring at an imposter. This isn't rare, this isn't crazy. This is the hidden vulnerability of being human, and once you understand it, you start to see how many of your daily struggles, anxiety, self-doubt, feeling lost, are rooted in this same fragile foundation. The good news? Understanding this phenomenon doesn't break you, it frees you. Because once you realize that identity is fluid, that the self is negotiable, you stop clinging so hard to outdated versions of who you think you're supposed to be. Here's what we're going to do. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 psychological phenomena that most people never learn about, but that secretly shape how you see yourself, others, and reality itself. We're starting with ego dissolution, the moment your sense of I starts to crack. Then we'll move into pareidolia, where your brain sees patterns and faces that aren't really there. After that, the uncanny effect, where familiar things suddenly feel threatening. Then shadow selves, the parts of you that you deny, but that control you anyway. And finally, we'll close the loop with fragility of self-recognition, bringing it all back to that mirror experiment and what it reveals about the nature of identity. This isn't surface-level self-help. This is weird psychology at its rawest, backed by research, stripped of the fluff, and designed to give you a framework for understanding why you feel the way you feel. And yes, by the end, you'll know exactly how to do the mirror trick yourself, and more importantly, what it actually means when your face stops looking like yours. Ready? Let's go. Ego dissolution, in practice, is that strange moment when someone realizes they're not just the main character of their own story, and it shakes everything they thought they knew about themselves. In psychology, this state usually shows up in reports of extreme experiences, deep meditation, near-death situations, use of certain perception-altering substances, or even during intensely emotional crises. The sensation is curious. Suddenly the rigid I, the one that keeps saying, "This is who I am," and that's final, starts to dissolve, like sugar in a glass of water. And that's when the game of human behavior gets interesting, because when the ego softens, a lot of what the person swore was absolute truth starts to seem questionable. In weird psychology, this is almost a living laboratory. You see beliefs, fears, habits, and social masks dismantling one by one. It's not comfortable, and it shouldn't be. But precisely because it's uncomfortable, this type of internal rupture usually opens doors the person didn't even know existed. Sometimes, for instance, they realize they don't actually hate people that much. They were just afraid of being rejected. Other times, they notice that the strong or victim role they've been playing for years is nothing but a learned script. And when that realization hits, the world around them doesn't change. But the way they see the world never goes back to normal. If we bring this down to everyday life, ego dissolution can happen in moments far less mystical than many imagine. An unexpected job loss, a painful breakup, a medical diagnosis, or even the simple act of moving to a new city can trigger this internal shock. The person looks in the mirror and thinks, "If I'm not this anymore, then who am I?" In psychology, these turning points are crucial for understanding what really drives human behavior behind appearances. It's like the ego is an app that crashed, and life forces a restart. In strange and unusual psychological phenomena, there are reports of people who, after traumatic events, radically change their values, lifestyle, even mundane tastes like music and food. This isn't nonsense. It's the brain trying to reorganize the internal narrative. Instead of running from this, a powerful move is to use these crises as an invitation for identity review. The person can grab a notebook and write, with brutal honesty, "What was I pretending to be? What can't I stand sustaining anymore?" This simple practice, so underestimated, is a weird psychology tool applied straight to the vein. It takes what's vague and makes concrete what the ego tries to hide even from itself. A more structured example, imagine someone who's always defined themselves as a failure because they grew up hearing that at home. They carry this label for years, and the ego clings to this story like it's an identity badge. Then, at some point, this person encounters therapy, psychology content, or even falls into an online community where human behavior is discussed more deeply. The shock comes when they realize that failure isn't an essence, it's a narrative. This crack is the beginning of ego dissolution. The internal story fractures, and the character they've been playing starts to seem poorly written. In weird psychology, we see this as a system bug. The old script tries to maintain itself, but new facts start showing otherwise. If this person decides to test a new behavior, learn a TI skill, finish a project, expose themselves more, and gets a small result, the old ego panics. This doesn't match who I am, and that's exactly where the golden opportunity lies. Whenever that discomfort hits, the right question isn't, "Why am I like this?" but rather, "Who convinced me I could only be this way?" See how this shifts the weight from guilt to the field of awareness? The smartest way to deal with ego dissolution isn't trying to kill the ego, as some superficial discourses preach, but rather renegotiating the contract with it. The ego is just the mind's image manager, not the company owner. When someone starts consuming serious psychology content, observing their own human behavior, understanding strange and unusual psychological phenomena, and opening up to what we call weird psychology, they gain internal vocabulary to talk with this manager. Instead of blindly believing every thought that appears, they start treating their own mental dialogue like a theater play. Some characters need new roles, others need to retire. A simple practice is using the observer self technique. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," the person trains to say, "I'm noticing anxiety in me right now." This small word swap, applied repeatedly, gradually dissolves the tyranny of the ego. And as this internal structure starts to flex, something very curious happens. The external world starts to seem more full of signs, patterns, and faces that might not be exactly what they seem at first glance. And that's precisely where the next phenomenon comes into play, like a kind of mischievous mirror of the mind. Pareidolia. Here we go. Pareidolia is that trick your brain plays when it sees faces in clouds, hears voices in white noise, or spots a sinister figure in the shadows of your bedroom at 3 a.m. In psychology, this phenomenon isn't a glitch. It's a feature. Your brain is wired to recognize patterns, especially human faces, because for thousands of years spotting a predator or a friendly face in the bushes meant the difference between survival and becoming someone's lunch. So when you glance at an electrical outlet and see two eyes and a mouth staring back at you, that's your ancient survival software running in the background. In human behavior, this pattern-seeking tendency is so powerful that it doesn't just stop at visual recognition. It spills over into how we interpret relationships, coincidences, and even random events. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and your brain instantly constructs a narrative. They hate me, or the universe is against me today. That's pareidolia on steroids applied to social situations. In weird psychology, researchers have found that people under stress, sleep deprivation, or emotional turmoil see faces and patterns way more frequently than those in calm states. Your brain, when anxious, goes into hypervigilant mode, scanning every shadow for threats that might not even be there. What makes pareidolia fascinating in the realm of strange and unusual psychological phenomena is how culturally specific it can get. Show an ink blot to 10 people from different backgrounds, and you'll get 10 wildly different interpretations. A person raised in a religious household might see angels or demons. Someone obsessed with conspiracy theories might spot hidden symbols and secret messages. A skeptic might just see random shapes. In psychology, this reveals something crucial about human behavior. We don't see the world as it is. We see it filtered through our beliefs, fears, and expectations. Here's a practical example. Ever notice how when you're thinking about buying a specific car, you suddenly see that exact model everywhere on the road? That's a form of pareidolia. Your brain is now primed to recognize that pattern. The cars were always there, but your attention wasn't. The same thing happens with negative thinking. If you spend your day convinced that everyone's out to get you, your brain will find evidence to support that belief in every neutral interaction. A co-worker doesn't say good morning. Clearly they're plotting against you. In weird psychology, this is called confirmation bias riding on the back of pattern recognition, and it can trap someone in a mental prison of their own making. Now here's where it gets even weirder, and this is something most people don't talk about. Pareidolia doesn't just happen with faces in random objects. It happens with emotions and intentions too. You ever look at someone's text message and hear their tone as angry, even though there's zero evidence of anger in the actual words? That's emotional pareidolia. Your brain is filling in gaps based on past experiences, current mood, and internal narratives. In psychology, this is a massive source of conflict in human behavior. Relationships crumble because someone saw disrespect where there was none, or heard sarcasm in a genuine compliment. A powerful practice to counter this is what's called reality testing. Before reacting to what you think you saw or heard, pause and ask, is this pattern real, or am I projecting? For instance, if you're convinced your boss hates you because they didn't smile at you this morning, test it. Did they smile at anyone else? Are they dealing with something stressful? Did you actually greet them first? In strange and unusual psychological phenomena, some people have trained themselves to question every automatic interpretation their brain throws at them, and the result is a calmer, more accurate view of reality. It's like upgrading from a paranoid operating system to one that's more balanced and evidence-based. But here's the kicker, and this is where pareidolia starts dancing with something darker. When you stare at something long enough, especially your own reflection, the brain's pattern recognition software starts to malfunction in the most unsettling ways. In weird psychology, there are documented cases of people who gazed at their own face in a dimly lit mirror for extended periods and reported seeing their features morph into something unrecognizable, sometimes monstrous. This isn't supernatural. It's your visual system getting fatigued and your brain scrambling to make sense of incomplete information, so it starts improvising. And when the brain improvises with your own face, the thing staring back at you can feel like a stranger, or worse, like something that knows you too well, but isn't quite you anymore. That unsettling sensation when the familiar suddenly feels wrong, when what should be safe becomes threatening, that's where pareidolia stops being a harmless curiosity and starts revealing something much more disturbing about how fragile our sense of recognition really is. The uncanny effect, when familiar becomes hostile. Let's dive in. The uncanny effect is that deeply disturbing feeling when something that should be comforting suddenly feels threatening, like when your childhood home looks wrong after years away, or when someone you know well acts just slightly off and your gut screams, something's not right here. In psychology, this phenomenon was famously explored by Freud, who called it das Unheimliche, the unhomely. It's that specific flavor of creepiness that comes not from the unknown but from the almost known, the nearly familiar twisted just enough to trigger alarm bells. In human behavior, this effect is incredibly powerful because it bypasses rational thought and hits straight at your emotional core. A stranger in a dark alley might scare you, but a loved one with a blank stare and a mechanical smile, that's pure nightmare fuel. The uncanny effect thrives in that gray zone where familiarity and strangeness collide. In weird psychology, researchers have found that our brains are exquisitely tuned to detect subtle deviations in familiar patterns. It's an evolutionary alarm system designed to spot when a tribe member is sick, possessed, or replaced by an imposter. When that alarm goes off, even if there's no logical reason for it, the body reacts. Heart rate spikes, pupils dilate, and every instinct screams to get away from whatever's triggering that wrongness. What makes this one of the most fascinating entries in strange and unusual psychological phenomena is how easily it can be triggered in completely mundane situations. Think about realistic humanoid robots or CGI characters that look almost human but not quite. That's the uncanny valley, a specific application of this effect. In psychology, the theory goes that when something looks 95% human, our brains focus obsessively on that missing 5%, and that gap becomes a source of deep unease. The same principle applies to people. Ever had a conversation with someone who seemed normal on the surface, but something about their eye contact, their laugh timing, or the way they responded felt rehearsed, like they were performing humanity rather than being human? That's the uncanny effect in action. In human behavior, psychopaths and certain personality disorders can trigger this response in people who are paying attention, not because they're monsters, but because they're emotional. Responses don't quite sync with the situation. They smile at the wrong moments, their empathy feels scripted, and your ancient brain picks up on micro-expressions that don't match the words coming out of their mouth. It's like watching a dubbed movie where the lips don't quite line up with the audio. Here's a practical example that'll hit home. Imagine you're scrolling through social media and you see a post from an old friend. The caption sounds like them, the photo looks like them, but something feels off. Maybe the writing style is slightly different, or they're sharing content they'd normally never touch. Your first thought might be, did they get hacked? But often, what you're experiencing is the uncanny effect applied to digital identity. In weird psychology, there's growing research on how people experience this phenomenon with AI-generated content, deepfakes, and even heavily filtered selfies. When someone edits their face so much that they no longer look quite real, viewers experience a subtle revulsion, not because the person is ugly, but because they've crossed into that uncanny territory where human meets inhuman. In psychology, this has massive implications for how we form trust and connection. If someone's online persona feels like a performance, people unconsciously withdraw, even if they can't articulate why. A powerful practice here is authenticity testing. When you're creating content, whether it's a social media post or a video, ask yourself, does this sound like something I'd actually say out loud to a friend? If the answer is no, you're probably triggering the uncanny effect in your audience, and they'll scroll past without knowing why. But the uncanny effect isn't just about external stimuli. It can happen with your own self, and that's where it gets truly disturbing. In strange and unusual psychological phenomena, there are documented cases of people experiencing what's called depersonalization, where they look at their own hands, hear their own voice, or see their reflection and feel like they're observing a stranger. It's not psychosis, it's a temporary disconnect between self-recognition and embodied experience. In human behavior research, this often happens during extreme stress, trauma, or dissociation. The person knows intellectually that this is my body, but emotionally it feels like piloting a meat robot. The familiar, their own physical form, becomes hostile territory. And here's the terrifying part. When you stare at your own face for too long, especially in low light or altered states, your brain can start to perceive your features as foreign, wrong, almost threatening. The eyes that should be comforting because they're yours suddenly look like they belong to someone or something else. That recognition breakdown, When the mirror stops reflecting you and starts showing a stranger wearing your skin, is where psychology crosses into something that feels almost supernatural. And it's in that moment of failed self-recognition that the deepest truths about identity start to surface. Shadow selves are the parts of you that you pretend don't exist, but that quietly run your life from the backstage. In psychology, the shadow is everything you repress, deny, or feel ashamed of. Your jealousy, cruelty, selfishness, lust, hunger for power, even your deep need for validation. You push it down, act like you're above all that, but human behavior betrays you in the small moments, those slips of the tongue, the overreactions, the "I don't know why I did that." In weird psychology, the shadow isn't seen as evil by default. It's raw, unfiltered energy. The problem isn't having a shadow, it's pretending you don't. That's when it leaks out sideways. You see this when someone wholly explodes in rage over something small, or a nice person suddenly becomes passive-aggressive and manipulative. Their conscious self-image says one thing, but the shadow doesn't give a damn about that marketing. The more someone tries to look pure, the more pressure builds in the basement. And when that basement door blows, it doesn't knock first. One of the most fascinating aspects of shadow selves in psychology is projection. You hate in others what you secretly refuse to admit in yourself. That's why some people are obsessed with calling everyone else lazy, stupid, fake, or evil. They're wrestling their own shadow in the mirror of the world. In human behavior, this shows up in that friend who constantly accuses everyone of lying, while they're the one who can't be honest even about how they feel. Strange and unusual psychological phenomena make this even clearer. There are experiments where people rate others harshly on traits they themselves scored high on in personality tests, without realizing the hypocrisy. A practical exercise. Next time someone triggers you beyond reason, like disproportionately, pause and ask, what exactly about this person bothers me so much? Where, even in 1%, does this live in me too? This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. In weird psychology, those who dare to ask this consistently start reclaiming pieces of themselves they'd exiled long ago. And the funny thing, the more you accept your own darkness, the less controlled by it you become. Here's where it gets personal and useful. Working with your shadow selves is like negotiating with a powerful but wild animal. You don't kill it, you learn to speak its language. In psychology-informed coaching and therapy, shadow work might look like writing down the traits you hate most in others, then asking, how do I express this same energy in a socially acceptable disguise? For example, someone who hates arrogant people might secretly crave recognition and hides it behind false humility. A person who criticizes others for being too emotional might be terrified of their own feelings. In human behavior, this inner split drains energy. You waste mental fuel maintaining a fake version of yourself while wrestling the real one in silence. A simple, raw practice. Write a confession letter you'll never send, admitting your darkest impulses, thoughts and cravings. All of it. This is straight weird psychology territory. It feels taboo, but it's unbelievably freeing. You see on paper that the monster in your head is mostly a scared, confused version of you that never got a chance to be heard. And now imagine what happens when shadow selves and self-recognition start to collide in the mirror. When you look at your own face, and for a split second, see not the good person image you've curated, but the parts you've denied. The rage in your eyes, the hunger in your jawline, the exhaustion you refuse to admit. In strange and unusual psychological phenomena, there are people who report that in low light, their reflection seems to morph into different versions of themselves, some younger, some older, some darker, some almost predatory, whether that's pure visual distortion or your mind finally letting the shadow peek through. The effect on human behavior is the same. You can't fully unsee what surfaced. The familiar self-image cracks, and behind it, another you stares back, one that doesn't follow your polite script. That split second of "that's me, but it's not me" is a doorway, and if you keep walking through it, you'll start to understand just how fragile your sense of "I know who I am" really is, especially when the mirror stops cooperating the way you expect. Fragility of self-recognition. This is for you to reflect on. Fragility of self-recognition is the unsettling realization that your ability to recognize yourself, your face, your voice, your sense of "I am me," is way more breakable than you think. In psychology, self-recognition is considered one of the foundations of consciousness. It's what separates humans from most animals. We can look in a mirror and understand that the reflection is us, not another person. But here's the twist. That recognition isn't hardwired as solidly as you'd assume. In human behavior research, there are conditions like prosopagnosia, where people lose the ability to recognize faces, including their own. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger every single time. No emotional connection. No, oh, that's me. Just a face. In weird psychology, even people without brain damage can experience temporary breakdowns in self-recognition under specific conditions: extreme fatigue, sensory deprivation, high stress, or certain altered states. It's like the software that says this body is mine suddenly crashes, and you're left staring at flesh and bone that feels profoundly foreign. And once you experience that disconnect, even briefly, the confidence you had in knowing yourself starts to feel like a polite fiction. Your brain tells you to keep things running smoothly. What makes this one of the most chilling entries in strange and unusual psychological phenomena is how easy it is to trigger. There's an experiment you can do right now, though I'll warn you it's deeply uncomfortable. Sit in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room and just stare at your face without blinking for about 60 seconds. Don't look away, don't adjust your expression, just lock eyes with yourself. In psychology, this is called the strange face in the mirror illusion, and about 66% of people who try it report disturbing distortions. Your face starts to warp, features shift, your eyes look hollow or predatory, your skin tone changes, and in some cases, people report seeing entirely different faces, superimposed over their own, sometimes monstrous, sometimes familiar, but wrong. This isn't hallucination in the clinical sense. It's your visual system fatiguing and your brain trying to fill in gaps with pattern recognition gone haywire. In human behavior, what happens next is even more interesting. People feel fear, not just because the image is distorted, but because the thing they relied on as their anchor, I know what I look like, just proved unreliable. That core sense of self, the one you wake up with every day, suddenly feels as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Here's where it connects to everything we've been building. Ego dissolution weakens the story you tell about who you are. Pareidolia shows you that your brain sees patterns that aren't always real. The uncanny effect teaches you that familiarity can flip into hostility in a heartbeat. Shadow selves reveal the parts of you that you've been denying exist. And now, with fragility of self-recognition, the final brick falls. Even the basic act of recognizing your own face isn't guaranteed. In weird psychology, this is where people start to understand that identity isn't a solid object. It's a process, a continuous negotiation between sensory input, memory, and narrative. When any part of that system glitches, you start to dissolve. A practical example: people who experience depersonalization disorder describe it as watching themselves from outside their body, knowing intellectually that's me, but feeling zero emotional connection to it. It's like being a passenger in your own life. In psychology, this is often triggered by trauma, but even healthy people can taste it during moments of extreme exhaustion or existential crisis. You look at your hands and think, these are my hands, and right? And that question mark, that tiny hesitation, is the crack where the fragility lives. So what does all this mean for someone just trying to live a normal life? In human behavior, the takeaway isn't to freak out and avoid mirrors. It's to understand that the self you walk around with is more like a collaborative fiction than a fixed truth. Your brain, your memories, your senses and your narratives are all voting on who you are, and sometimes they disagree. The people who thrive in strange and unusual psychological phenomena aren't the ones who pretend none of this exists. They're the ones who get comfortable with the discomfort. They learn to say, yeah, I don't fully understand what I even means, and that's okay. That flexibility, that willingness to sit with the unknown, is what keeps them from spiraling when the mirror stops reflecting what they expect. And if you're brave enough to stare into that mirror for 60 seconds, to confront the distortions, to feel your face become unfamiliar, you're not losing your mind. You're just getting a rare, uncomfortable glimpse at how your mind actually works beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, starting to ask yourself what else you've been taking for granted about the person you think you are. So now you know. You've seen how ego dissolution cracks the story you tell about yourself. You've learned how pareidolia makes your brain see threats and patterns where none exist. You've felt the uncanny effect, that creeping sensation, when the familiar turns hostile. You've met your shadow selves, the parts of you that you've been shoving into the basement for years. And you've stared into the fragility of self-recognition, realizing that even your own face isn't as stable as you thought. But here's the real question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to close this video, scroll to the next distraction, and pretend you didn't just learn something that changes everything? Or are you going to sit with this discomfort, let it rewire how you see yourself and actually apply it? Because here's the truth most people won't tell you. Knowing this stuff intellectually does nothing. It's the application that transforms you. It's the moment you catch yourself projecting your shadow onto someone else and stop mid-sentence. It's the moment you notice pareidolia twisting a neutral situation into a threat and you choose not to react. It's the moment you look in the mirror, see the distortion, and instead of freaking out, you smile and say, "Yeah, I see you. You're part of me too." That's when human behavior shifts from autopilot to conscious design. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think about this, not just passively listen. When was the last time you questioned your own narrative? When was the last time you looked at your identity, the labels you wear, the beliefs you carry, the version of you perform every day, and asked, is this even real or is this just a script I learned? In psychology, the people who break through to the next level aren't the ones with the most confidence or the best circumstances. They're the ones willing to get uncomfortable with the questions no one else wants to ask. They're the ones who do shadow work in a journal at 2 a.m. They're the ones who stare into the mirror until their face looks wrong, and instead of running, they lean in and ask, "What are you trying to show me?" In weird psychology, this is where transformation happens, not in the safe, comfortable, socially acceptable spaces, but in the raw, messy, terrifying moments where you confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. So here's my challenge to you. Pick one thing from this video, just one. Maybe it's the mirror experiment. Maybe it's writing down your shadow traits. Maybe it's catching yourself in the act of projection. Whatever it is, do it today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, today. Because here's what I've learned studying strange and unusual psychological phenomena for years. Most people treat this kind of knowledge like entertainment. They watch, they nod, they think, "Wow, that's interesting." And then they go right back to living the same autopilot life. And that's fine. There's no judgment here. But if you're still watching, if you made it this far, that tells me something about you. It tells me you're not satisfied with surface-level answers. It tells me you're hungry for something deeper, something real, something that actually explains why you feel the way you feel and why you do the things you do. And if that's true, then you can't afford to treat this like passive content. You have to engage with it. You have to test it. You have to let it challenge the comfortable lies you've been telling yourself. Because the alternative is staying stuck in the same patterns, the same fears, the same outdated version of yourself that stopped serving you years ago. And I don't think that's what you want. I think you're here because some part of you is ready to break out of that cage, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's scary, even if it means looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back. So here's what I need you to do. First, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced any of these phenomena? Have you ever stared at your face and seen it distort? Have you caught yourself projecting your shadow onto someone else? Have you felt that uncanny sensation where something familiar suddenly felt wrong? I want to hear your stories, because this isn't just theory. This is lived experience, and the more we talk about it, the more we normalize the weird, uncomfortable truths about human behavior that most people are too afraid to admit. Second, if this video gave you even one insight that shifted how you see yourself or the world, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Not because I need the numbers, but because this is the kind of content that gets buried by algorithms. YouTube doesn't promote uncomfortable truths. It promotes easy entertainment. So if you want more, deep dives into psychology, weird psychology, and strange and unusual psychological phenomena that actually change how you think, you have to actively choose to keep seeing it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's keep peeling back the layers of what it really means to be human, one uncomfortable truth at a time.